It's starting to feel like almost every other season we get a new anime that is in some way, shape, or form basically just a gimmick romance. Meaning it's a romance anime, of course, but there's some sort of shtick, some sort of hook, selling point to get you invested that at the end of the day really is just, for lack of a better term, a gimmick. It's something that's often said in the title and very prominent in the description, and the question ends up being, can the show utilize this gimmick to tell a meaningful and memorable story, or is the show literally just the gimmick and nothing else? Some of these gimmick romances have turned out very well. I was a big fan of last year's Tomo-chan as a Girl, which is very much so a gimmick romance. But it actually worked, and it transcended that gimmick and told a really strong story, ultimately. This year, we ended up with something that didn't quite work out so well. Let's take a look at the one that just finished airing last season, Alya Sometimes Hides Her Feelings in Russian, which... yeah, that is a gimmick romance title if I have ever seen one. The whole idea here, for those of you who have not seen the show, is that this girl who is half Japanese, half Russian, often will speak in Russian to her classmate who she really likes. Because she isn't quite ready to profess her feelings yet, she doesn't quite understand her feelings entirely, she effectively ends up flirting with him, but in Russian, thinking, okay, he doesn't understand what I'm saying, he won't be able to tell that I'm flirting, right? Normally, that would be the end of the gimmick, and that would be the show, and she would be saying all these things, and only us, the audience, would know what she's really saying, and Masachika would have to basically try to guess, because obviously he wouldn't know Russian, right? Well, funny thing about that, he understands Russian, which is really kind of dumb, and very, very convenient. And while there is a reason for it in the show, it's still just a little bit too silly, I'll be honest, and I think as soon as that became clear, a lot of people started to really question what the show would be capable of pulling off. Because it puts us in a situation where not only do we know what Alya is saying, Masachika knows what she's saying. And he ends up deciding not to reveal that he understands because he thinks, okay, it'll really embarrass her when she finds out I understand Russian. So it results in a weird situation where he is completely aware that she likes him, that she is flirting with him, and yet doesn't actually act on it, even though it's clear that he feels something for her too, which unfortunately puts the romance in this weird spot where you have to kind of sit back and wonder, why are these two not together when one of them knows for a fact that the other one, at the very least, feels something for them? And they try to sort of explain it away and say, oh, well, maybe he doesn't know for sure because maybe he thinks that she's trolling him and that she somehow knows that he understands Russian and she's just saying all these things to try and get a rise out of him and it's not working, which, okay, maybe if she had just started doing that, maybe you could convince yourself that that's the case, but she's been doing this for a while, and it just does not make sense for him to not recognize that, yeah, she feels something for him. So it's hard to sort of believe that Masachika wouldn't have made a move yet on her. It's understandable Alya wouldn't have, but he really should have made a move already, and it's weird that he hasn't. And because there isn't a good enough justification for him not to, it's hard to really get super invested in the romance to begin with. Maybe if it wasn't so clear that he likes her, or I don't know, if there was just some ambiguity there, it'd be more believable and the romance might benefit from it. But as it is now, not only is the romance not particularly compelling, but it's just hard to believe that they aren't together already. Alya herself is also a weak point in this show, which is weird to say because it is her show. It is her gimmick that makes the show exist. She is in the title. Her gimmick is in the title. How is she not the best character in the show? Well, not only is she not the best character in the show, she is maybe the least interesting character in the show, which is weird because that means she is less interesting than supporting characters who are only in a handful of episodes and don't have nearly as much screen time, but it's honestly the truth. Her sister is way more interesting. Even the student council president and vice president are more interesting, and it doesn't quite make sense to me how they could tailor this show around her in every way, and yet she is just not compelling at all as a character, and neither is her gimmick. I mean, okay, yeah, she speaks another language to hide her feelings. Wow. Anything else? Like, that's kind of the trap of these gimmick romances, that the gimmick can work if the show goes beyond that gimmick and actually does something interesting with that gimmick. And unfortunately, right off the bat, the show kind of kneecaps that gimmick when Masachika can understand Russian, and then it just doesn't do anything interesting with it or Alya. And this is not exactly a unusual or uncommon opinion. If you've heard anything about this show, it is almost certainly about a character who is not Alya, not Masachika, not anyone else who I mentioned. It is almost certainly about the real best character in this show being Yuki. Yuki, despite being very much so a supporting character, although probably the third most important character in the show after Alya and Masachika, is easily the character who carries the show on her back. She is the primary reason to watch this show. Beyond anything else. More so than any other character, more so than anything going on in the story, she is the reason to watch this show. This is her show through and through. Even though she's not in the title, even though this is not meant to be her show, she is the reason to watch this show. If you've seen any clip from this show on YouTube or Twitter, it almost certainly is one involving her. She's a gremlin, 100%, but she is so enjoyable to watch. She steals every scene that she's in, and it's hard not to completely adore her whenever she's on screen. She is the silver lining here, the one compelling reason to watch this series. She is just such a complete joy and treat to watch, and every scene she's in, again, she commands it. It is her scene. She turns it into her show, even though it is very clearly not her show. Unfortunately, the show doesn't utilize her as much as it should, as much as I wish it did. Like I said, she is only really the third most important character in the show, and while that does mean that she shows up a good amount, she's not there as much as I wish. Nevertheless, the screen time she does get is, without a doubt, the best part of this series. It is ultimately the main reason I would ever suggest anybody watch this series. It is solely for her. Because if you take Yuki out of the show, there's very little worth watching here. That's not to say the show is bad. I do think some of the other supporting characters are at least entertaining, and I don't think the show necessarily does anything that's unforgivable or difficult to sit through. Like, it's a fairly easy show to watch. But at the same time, if you take Yuki out, a lot of the comedy goes away, and ultimately, Masachika and Alya just are not interesting enough to justify watching the show. And their romance is, as I said, very weak and very questionable. On top of that, a big part of the show ends up coming down to this student council election stuff. And I'll be honest, it really kind of drags the show down in the last few episodes. It's really evident like the last 2 to 3 where it is the primary focus, even though it's there in the background basically from the start. And a lot of that just comes down to it just not being all that interesting. Despite the fact that it could be, like there is some backstory stuff regarding Masachika and Yuki and even Alya to a lesser extent that could be really interesting, and you could sort of tell the show is like planting the seeds of it, and I hope that in the already announced second season we will get to see those seeds grow fruit, that we'll actually see some interesting stuff happen. But if we're just talking about the season that exists right now, they really don't do anything with it, and it is a massive shame. On top of that, the whole reason for Alya to run for student council president and for Masachika to support her rather than Yuki, there is an explanation. It just isn't a super great explanation. Like, it really does just come down to, oh, Masachika likes her and admires her, and, you know, he has this trauma from supporting Yuki in the past because of, you know, their backstory. Like, that's fine, but it still isn't really enough, right? Like, at the end of the day, I look at what the show presents us, and I still think he should be supporting Yuki and not Alya. And unfortunately, the show, instead of just admitting that and saying he's doing it because he likes her, it tries to make it out to be much more thoughtful and justifiable than it really is. Like, it really tries to go out of its way to be like, no, he's supporting Alya because of good reasons, because, oh, she would genuinely be a better leader because of this. And it's like, yeah, but not really. Like, the show pretends like it has bigger reasons why he's supporting Alya, but it really doesn't. And it's just a shame that the student council stuff could have been and should have been a lot more interesting if it actually put the backstory and the trauma and all of the issues surrounding the Suou family at the forefront, which, again, I hope that they will do in the second season, but I wish they had done it now because it would have made those last few episodes a little bit more interesting. And that's what's kind of frustrating. Like, there is potential for that story arc to have something compelling in it, but the show just doesn't act on it. And I hope that they will act on it in the future, but I don't know if they will. And I would be very disappointed if in this second season it doesn't, and it just kind of continues to flounder around and do more of the same. And great, you know, at the very least we would have more Yuki, and that would be amazing, and I really hope we get to see her even more in the second season. But again, take her away. Ignore her for a second, as difficult as that may be. And you really don't have that much here. The show really can't stand on its own. And it certainly can't stand on the back of Alya, because Alya, there is not enough to her character, not enough to her gimmick, not enough to her romance with Masachika to make the show a worthwhile watch. Yuki really should have been the focus of the show somehow. I know that would kind of change what the show is really about, but this really is, at the end of the day, her show. Even though it's not her name in the title, even though it's not her gimmick, she is this show. She is the reason to watch this show, and she carries this show hard. it can be difficult to justify recommending a show solely on the basis of one character who is not even the main character. At the end of the day, I think this experience goes to show that just because you have a gimmick in your romance doesn't mean that that gimmick can carry the show, because while some of these shows will be able to go beyond that gimmick, plenty of them will not. At the very least, there is still that one very positive, very bright light shining down that is Yuki, that at least gives the show something to make it memorable. I just really hope that season 2 kind of turns things around and focuses on some of the things that could have been really interesting in season 1 that the show just had no interest in delving into too deeply. At the very least, hey, if there's more Yuki, I guess I'll be happy. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and until next time, take care everyone. Look forward to the next video.